You're listening to Across the Pondcast. Cybersecurity rants and war stories from both sides of the Atlantic.
Hello and welcome to Across the Pondcast, a show where we talk and occasionally rant about cybersecurity topics with perspectives from both sides of the Atlantic. I am Tib3rius. I'm joined, as always, by my wonderful co-host, Mr. Andy Swift. Andy, how are you doing?
I am really good, thank you, Model Puff. I've had a fantastic week so far, and I'm here talking to you again, so what could be better?
What was the word you used? Muddle Puff?
Muddle Puff, yes.
Muddle Puff.
Mm-hmm.
I thought you maybe say Muggle Puff for a minute. I'm like, what?
Muggle Puff? Hey, you can go Harry Potter.
No, thank you.
I wonder where sorting out would put you. I don't know.
I mean, in Hogwarts Legacy, I was sorted into Slytherin, so make of that what you will.
No offense, you do give off Slytherin vibes.
Wow. Oh, boy.
It's all right. I would definitely be in Hufflepuff.
Yes. Yeah, I think we all agree on that, for sure. The title of today's episode is Why Can't Pentesters Scope? In episode 1 of this very podcast, we asked the question, why can't customers scope? And now we're going to blame ourselves. Why can't we scope, Swift?
Terrible. Not been doing it long enough. Blind. Deaf. I don't know. All these things we shall discuss today.
Excellent. Before we start, this show is made possible thanks to our sponsors. If you want to sponsor an episode, please send an email to sponsors@acrossthepondcast.net for more details. I think first, let's address the elephant in the room, which is when asking a question like, why can't pentesters scope? We really should start with, do your pentesters even scope? Do you even scope, brah?
T-shirt right there. Absolute T-shirt.
I need that T-shirt for DEF CON.
Yeah, I'd wear it. Get 2. So, my pen testers do, because I'm very much a firm believer in if they don't, it's going to be terrible. Because I've had too many bad experiences in the past with salespeople trying to do scoping, adding random days on or underscoping things because they don't really understand the ask of a client. And I think this bleeds from times past, because in times gone past, I think pen testing scoping was a lot easier, especially when it comes to applications and stuff like that. And to some extent, infrastructure as well. The more infrastructure becomes very much cloud-based, virtualized, etc., containerized, yada, yada, it's becoming more complicated for people to do a kind of easy scope thing. So the questions of old were like, oh, how many IP addresses have you got? Or how many functions does your application have? And it's like, okay, well, that can work. But nowadays, we've got a lot more complexity to that and a lot more layers of that, which are not easily understandable for most salespeople to wrap their heads around, and if they haven't done some kind of specialist training or been technical themselves before. So my stance on it is kind of, I think the pen testers need to be scoping, because otherwise there's too much to be missed these days. It needs to be done by a proper technical person. Otherwise, we're going to end up not doing the best job for a client. That's my kind of view on it. Anything to the contrary?
No, I think pen testers should be scoping. I think it makes more sense because ultimately they are going to be doing the test. And so you can't just take a junior pen tester and tell them to scope an application. They wouldn't know what to scope it at. But after a year of testing, you can scope applications, you can scope internals easily. And that's because you've done them. So if you get enough experience, and you say you're throwing the 5-day test for some e-commerce platform, and it was enough time and you got everything done, great. Now you know that whenever you see an e-commerce platform that looks like that looks as complex as that, right, that's a 5-day. Easy. On the contrary, if you were testing some kind of big data application and you were given 5 days and at the end of it you're like, wow, this was a complete nightmare. I didn't have enough time to test absolutely everything. I would have loved a few more days. Then there you go. Next time you see one of those applications, you'll be like, oh, this should be probably a 10-day test, if not more. And so it boils down to experience, right? The salespeople haven't tested things. And it's in the same vein, customers haven't tested things. So I'm not sure if we did mention this in episode 1. I can't even remember episode 1. That's all the blur. But it's like why are you asking people who aren't going to actually do the testing to come up with an accurate scope? It's just not going to happen.
No.
Or if it is, it's going to happen because of just pure luck, or because you've got a number of companies that I've worked at where we do have a majority sort of sales-based scoping. We have at least instructed the salespeople on how to actually scope, and we have the questions we need them to ask the customers, numbers they can plug into like a calculator app that we have. And sometimes that'll give an accurate scope, but most of the time it probably won't. Because you can't really just go off the numbers sometimes. The application is always a little more complicated than you probably might think. And there's so many things that can go wrong with scoping. And let's say, like, I'll finish off my train of thought with the fact that I think scoping is ultimately an impossible task. It's a lot of luck anyway, because the problem is you don't really know what you're going to find. If you scope a test, it looks like it's going to be 5 days, and it might be 5 days if you don't find anything good. But then suddenly you find, like, oh my God, every single input has cross-site scripting or something, and now you have so much reporting to do, and you're trying to like deep dive into all these different cross-site scripting vulnerabilities. And so ironically, the more stuff you find, the more time you kind of need, because suddenly a report that wasn't going to take long to write is now going to take a lot of time to write, and report time is often part of the actual test time. So yeah, that's like there's no predicting that though. You can't be like, oh, how many vulnerabilities do you think your application has? And they're like, we're hiring you to answer that question. And we're like, yeah, but we kind of need to know, because
I might add that, like, for an April Fool's Day thing, like, onto our testing questionnaires. How many vulnerabilities do you think you might have in your application?
How many SQL injections do you have? How many cross-site scripting?
How many CVSS 7 or above issues will we find if we test your application? Determine whether we take them on. I like that. That's good.
Like, it'd be a fun thing to do, like, as a if we find, like, estimate how many vulnerabilities, and the closer you are, the more of a discount we give you.
That reminds me of
for next time.
That reminds me of vulnerability bingo we used to do in the office.
Big vulnerability bingo.
Vulnerability bingo.
That was good.
We used to have a printout of all the different vulnerabilities behind us on our desks when we used to go into offices those days.
I wrote this.
You wrote this.
It was an app that generated a random bingo sheet for everybody.
Pentesters.
And then every Monday we'd print one off, and everybody would get a different bingo sheet, and then you just had to get a line. It was awesome.
It was great. It's a little bit stacked between the guys. Like, if you knew you were going on site that week and you were going to do like a big internal somewhere, you're like, I'm going to win, because the scope is just so huge.
Well, there was a mixture of app and network. That was the thing. You had to get sort of, you couldn't just rely.
Not just like.
There was a method to my madness. I need to remake Big Vulnerability Bingo and just put it online.
Can we make an online version, and then just all Twitter peeps can just.
Yeah.
We'll all just jump on it.
I'm literally going to vibe code it after we finish recording this.
Do it whilst we're recording it.
No.
That's the beauty of vibe coding, right? Back on track. I have a couple of points. Sorry to bring the podcast back on track. So I got a couple of points. Don't know what you can find was the first one. You're absolutely right. And from an infrastructure point of view, that is a pain in the balls, because often clients will ask us stuff during scoping about what tools we're going to use, about what techniques we're going to use, and what vulnerabilities we're going to find. It's the most bizarre one I've been asked plenty of times before. And you're like, well, I don't know. I can't quantify it for you until I take a look. It's like taking your car to the garage and just going, like, it's broke. And, like, you're not going to be able to tell how it's broke until you actually look at it and diagnose some problems. Very much the same with pen testing. You've got to look at something and analyze it before you actually can give them a yardstick about how long it's going to take, because we might uncover so many interesting things and so many rabbit holes to jump down. But that's part of the art of being a pen tester, is being able to kind of work out which of those are the most important to dive down, and what is going to the follow-up questions you need to have with the client, and follow-up conversations you have with the client, to kind of bring that conversation round to say, we did this, it was much worse than we expected, sorry, but if you want a more comprehensive test, we've got to go deeper on this and give them the options. You got to try to find all those big, important, big hitters. But if there's something you suspect is going to be more, or you're going to need more time for, don't be scared of asking. Because at the end of the day, the client 9 times out of 10 has got their security at their interests, at sort of heart of what they're doing. Not everyone is just out there to do it for compliance reasons, but sometimes there's conversation to help, or it can help you at least plan the next year's testing or the next quarter's testing with them, or whatever. Whatever their testing schedule plan looks like. And the other thing I picked up on about salespeople in particular is that there's a lot of drive around businesses at the moment for speed of scoping. And it drives me nuts because it's that speed versus quality thing. And if someone if you've just given them, you've told them you've got an environment, you've got a website, how many days is that going to take? And they turn around and say 4. Probably alarm bells might ring if you haven't had to fill in a load of scoping documentation and stuff before that, because they're probably just guessing or guesstimating it without giving you a proper look through or walkthrough or giving you an understanding of the application. Realistically, those conversations should take quite a long time. Sit downs with people that are actually doing the testing, the actual testers themselves, to get a yardstick on what your application looks like, what it does, all the functions it may have within it, and things like admin pages that we haven't considered or haven't been told about. It's like that one we discussed the other day, the cross-site scripting CAL thing. That administrative portal, going back to that, was a completely separate application, not in scope. So those conversations can help fill out those little gaps, and all of a sudden the scope goes from this is what the client wanted to do to actually this is what's useful, this is what's right to test, and this is what gives you the best coverage from an attacking perspective. And I think that's sort of the big key difference for me.
Yeah, I think for any customers listening, potential customers, if you are looking for a pen test and you go to a company and the company sends you a questionnaire, you fill out like how many pages, how many roles, and they immediately quickly come back with, oh yeah, we can do this in this amount of time. That should be ringing alarm bells. Absolutely. If it's just like, oh, we can do this, we don't need to look at the application, that kind of stuff. If there's not in that response for a more detailed evaluation, we would need to see the application on a call. I think that's bad. And a lot of the industry does that, unfortunately. And it's probably just because competitiveness, right? But I wish customers would start pushing back. I wish customers would be like, well, it's like that. There was a John Oliver joke one time, like when you order takeout, delivery, and it arrives 5 minutes later, and it's like you didn't have time to cook that properly. And it's kind of like it's kind of like the same thing.
Absolutely.
Okay, you didn't have time to come up with an accurate scope. And I've been on scoping, actual scoping calls where there was an initial sort of, oh, we estimate we can do it in this amount of time based on what you've told us, and then the customer does the demo, and they have whoever was organizing the call or organizing the pen test was like, oh yeah, so there's 3 roles, right? And the project manager or dev is like, no, there's 5. And it's so that's the other thing. Sometimes there's just a disconnect. The customer isn't wrong, but there's just doesn't have the most up-to-date information about their own application, because there is a disconnect between the person looking for a pen test and the people developing the application. And so, yeah, that's important as well, to actually see the application, talk to the people who developed it. Developers should be on scoping calls. They understand the app probably better than anyone. They can also answer a bunch of the more technical questions the pen testers have. All right, pen testers and developers probably understand the application, at least at a protocol level and code level, better than anyone else involved in the entire scoping process. So pen testers should be talking to developers, I think, for scoping.
I think so, because it gives you a strong technical understanding. So I've had it a few times where so there are 2 types of people you often get on these sorts of calls, especially for applications. It's not so much for infrastructure, but definitely for applications.
I was going to say, sysadmins should be on the call for infrastructure.
And then it's a different sort of conversation, because you're more talking about environments and stuff that project managers won't realize about an environment, particularly around access and stuff like that. Can we have access to this trunk port over here? Just that information they just won't have or won't know where best to connect you to. And that's where that all falls down usually is, you have something scoped by a project manager and a pen tester sat in there, and the thing is never brought up about where I'm actually going to connect from. So they get on site and it's like, yes, we haven't actually thought about connectivity to the environment. So you know what's in scope? You know the environment you're testing. Yeah, don't know how you're connecting to it. I've seen that quite a few times where that sort of comes a cropper. So those sysadmins really need to be in those conversations, because they'll be able to flourish you with all of the requirements of what you need to connect, be it if it's a VPN connection, if it's a certain port in a data center that needs opening up, whatever. They'll be able to help you out, and they will be able to push that process along, because that's the other thing. You leave a project manager in to go and like beg, borrow and steal someone to open up a port or raise a request to like give someone like a VPN configuration. Well, that's going to take time. Usually going direct to admins, you can usually get that done a little bit quicker. So yes, there is that. But in the application point of view, two types of people you tend to get on these calls. The developers, which are super useful usually, if not a bit suspect, because you're about to tear their code apart, which is always a little bit standoffish at that. And then the other types I tend to find are the ones that are demoing it from a point of view of like a user journey, or they're like from the sales team who are interested in selling their product to other people, and they'll walk you through the application like they would a standard user talking about the journey. And that's fine, but doesn't leave you much scope to ask things like technical questions and gather their technical input. So yeah, we did one of those a few weeks ago, and the guy just would not veer from his script that he had. And he was clearly like reading from a script as well through his tutorial, as if we were clients. And we're like, it's like, oh, if you pay extra for this feature, then you'll get access to these things. So like, no, we're here to pen test it.
Oh, jeez.
So yeah, it's a little bit, it's just getting the right people in the right room at the right time to gather the right scopes. Yeah, two types of people. Make sure you get the right ones. Both are handy. Sometimes it's useful for knowing things like user journeys as well, because anything that goes against that or is completely unexpected, you then have the context to be able to call it out. In some applications, some environments, that's quite helpful and important. So yeah. Oh, the other thing, I've branded this thing called spare time pen tests as well. And it drives me scatty as a manager. It really does, having seen people do this in the past, because it's not good for the business, it's not good for their workflow, and it's also not good for their mental health. That's the big three, spare time pen tests. And this is where don't scope something correctly, or you don't have the right people that you're having the discussions with. You rush for scoping and you go, or you get a bit cocky about your scoping and you go, oh, that's going to be 4 days because I've seen that a million times before. And then it turns out to be like an 8-day at least pen test. And then you get there and you start doing it. And then you're like, I can't ask the client for more time because I would look like an idiot at this point in time. And that just won't go down with the clients. Or I can do it in my spare time and make it up in the background. At which point, your resourcing team have probably booked other jobs around that time where you would need it. And yeah, the other thing is, you've got to make that time up somewhere, and that's no good for anyone's mental health. So you end up rushing stuff, and then quality of work dips as well.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I've seen pen testers do that a lot, especially experienced ones, because they've done a lot of things before, and it becomes quite an easy thought trail to go, oh, I'll just skip over that little part of the process, or I don't really need a scoping call on that, or to run through the demo of that application because I've seen stuff similar to it before millions of times. And yeah, do you know what? Like 70% of the time, you might be right, but they're those corner cases that will catch you out if you're not careful with it. So yeah, it's an easy hole to fall into. I see people doing it all the time, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, there are occasions where I'll, not necessarily because the app's not scoped well enough, but I'll test beyond the time we have, just because it's been a fun app.
Right, okay, that's self-punishment, self-harm.
It's not really self-punishment. It's just, this app is actually quite fun. I'm just going to keep testing a little bit more, like especially if it's time boxed. Like time boxed applications where you've already told the customer, like, oh, we're only going to spend 4 days on this, and because that's maybe all the customer has has money to spend on. Yeah, it's like, well, best effort. But like sometimes it's like, oh, this app is so fun to test. Yeah, that I'm just going to keep going, and not fun in the sense that it's a good app. Let's just say that. If a pen test is like, oh, I had a really fun time on your application, that's bad for you. That's
a conversation you don't want. The pen test team had a whale of a time today. As a client, that's probably like your doom scenario. That is the thing you don't want to hear. I've done that sort of stuff with infrastructure things as well, where I've not I've stayed behind a few times just because there is an interesting infrastructure and lots to find in it. I've done that a few times. But what I really relate to, and I think something I find quite interesting, is in some parts of some things that you end up testing are going to be strange things, especially if you end up on sort of a SCADA side of stuff where you're testing weird industrial type equipment and weird industrial protocols. Even if you're testing things like big telecom companies, there's going to be stuff like routers and equipment that you frankly are not going to see in a training environment because they cost hundreds of thousands of pounds each, and they're just, no one's buying that in a training environment. So unless you've been there and done it before, the airtime to go and get like time to play on stuff like that is so limited. So scenarios like that, or especially in the hardware sort of SCADA realm, I remember there was a company I was working with, and they're heavily involved in things like infrastructure, let's just say, around like the country, like a sort of critical infrastructure, I guess, as well. So things like traffic lights and stuff like that. Put it in that bucket. They do other things as well, but we'll say that. It's the safest one I can talk about. Like, those things have controllers. Of course they do. Like all stuff industrial-wise has a controller, some kind of logic controller somewhere. And a lot of them haven't been through any kind of pen testing. And when are you going to get the chance, other than being on site, to test something like that? So there's been cases where we've gone through, we've done the regular pen tests, the infrastructure pen tests that sit behind these devices, and then gone, seen using these. We haven't seen too many of those in the industry before. Can we take one home? And it's only worked a couple of times. But once they turned around and said, look, yeah, we've got a load of spare ones out the back here. If you want to do some research in it, we'll support you with the research. We'll give you one to go away and work with. And then we got involved in a longer term research project with them, directly involved on these devices. And that's just because someone put their hand up and went, that's interesting, that's weird. No one's really looked at that stuff before. Can I have one? And that's, for me, the stuff that makes pen testing fun. It's not the turning up and doing the same scans of the same networks, finding the same vulnerabilities. It's for finding new stuff and finding hardware you might not have used before, infrastructures that have a purpose that you've never really thought about before, and just getting some understanding around it. And yeah, sometimes nicking the equipment, asking permission very nicely to borrow some equipment.
So let's get back on track a little, because I feel like we haven't been hard on pen testers enough. Why do pen testers suck at scoping? Let's go over the reasons. And there's a pretty big one I can think, at least for AppSec reasons, which is the scoping call is generally how a pen tester would scope something, right? So you have a call with a customer, they demo the application, and it's usually get the customer to walk through the application, right? So they're sharing their screen, they're using functionality. Basically, it's to give the idea of to give a pen tester an idea of, okay, this isn't how the application works. So they're not just thrown in thinking, oh God, what happens if I click here? And there are, if it's an e-commerce application, then obviously, everyone knows how you, like, there are certain applications that are designed for public use. So scoping an e-commerce application in terms of why you do a walkthrough isn't necessarily to teach the pen tester about the application itself. It's more just to show them complexity, because there are e-commerce platforms that are simple and there are e-commerce platforms that are extremely complicated. And so it's really about showing complexity. On the other hand, there are applications which are to be used by very specific people, specific industries. And the problem there is that the application might be quite simple in terms of functionality, but using it has a learning curve. So they might be like, oh, so you need to click this button and then you need to enter this specific code and click search, and then you have to highlight this thing, and then these fields should be editable, and then you click save, and then there's a drop down that you choose, and then you have to submit that job. Like, okay, that's why you have those scoping calls, because there's like a flow that you have to go through. And whenever there's an application that has a learning curve, the people who use the application have been using it for years and understand the application. You have a pen tester who's never seen it before. They have a week to test it, and they have to use it. That's unfortunately the first stage. This should be like one of those like Chinese proverbs. The first stage of testing an application is using an application.
I like it. It's another t-shirt. I'm going to have one for each
To
step.
successfully pen test the application, you must learn the application.
Yes. We're going to have like a t-shirt for every day of DEF CON at this rate. It's going to be great.
It's true though. You can't with applications that like that's the thing. If you want a test that's actually done well, the pen testers have to understand the application, and if they're just thrown in without ever seeing the application before, there's going to be a heck of a lot of emails to the customer like, what does this thing do? How do I get this to work? And that's why day one of the pen test should always be just exploring the application, making sure all the functionality works.
Yeah.
And then sending an email to the customer if it doesn't. Because if something doesn't work in the application, better to discover it on day one. And sometimes you won't discover it on day one, let's say that. Sometimes I've had to email customers at the end of the pen test because for whatever reason, there was a piece of functionality that I missed in my initial sort of clicking around the application at the start. And I saw it and then I was like, oh, that's not working. Or, maybe it was working on day one, but then when it comes to day 4, it's just not. Right? A lot of us test products in staging. Stuff's going on, things go down. So knowing how the application works is huge for pen testers. And the problem with this, the main issue with a scoping call is it's very, very visual. And that's, so I've said we need to see the application. And now I'm complaining that we're seeing the application, which might sound like a massive contradiction. And maybe it is. But the point is, there's that additional thing where learning the application is one thing. Testing the application is another. And the stuff that you see when you're clicking around an application is like the tip of the iceberg. You know that iceberg meme, right? Where it's like you have where the application is everything above like sea level. Everything you see in the application is above sea level. And then below that, there is all the HTTP requests, all the API calls, all the JavaScript, right? It's just chaos. That's another meme I need to make. Like, people watching this episode people listening to this episode who follow me on Twitter are probably going to be like, oh, I remember when he posted those memes. So, yeah, the problem is when you're testing application, 5% of it is visual. We're talking about the actual test now. 5% of it is you have a browser open and you're clicking around the application. That's 5%. 95% for applications, and I know people are going to be like, but what about networks? I'm like, yeah, I don't do networks. I'm a web app monkey. 95% of it is in Burp Suite or whatever proxy you want to use. That's the truth. 95% of it, I'm looking at raw HTTP requests or exploring JavaScript, but mostly HTTP requests. And yeah, I don't see that on a scoping call, and it's hard to. I feel like a lot of pen testers can't scope properly because they're not seeing the stuff like in a scoping call. They're not seeing the part of the application that they're really going to deal with in a test. And don't get me wrong, I think scoping calls are great. I'm not asking for scoping calls to go away. I think scoping calls where there's a demo of the application is great. Let's keep doing that. Let's do more of that. But we need to see the data, I think, to scope properly. And it's almost like, I'm almost tempted to be like, can we give the testers access to the application, get on the scoping call, they'll proxy everything through Burp Suite. You as the customer tell us, click on that, or click on this, or go through this process. Like, this is the part of the application. Just like walk us through it, but we've already got access to the application. And I know that's unrealistic because if you're at the point where you're just doing a scope, you probably don't have access to the application anyway.
That'll take a long time.
But that's a way of doing it. The alternative is to, and you can't do this with Burp Suite Community, unfortunately, because you can't save results from that. But getting them to use some kind of proxy tool and walk through the application themselves. But even that's going to be more complicated because, a lot of customers won't understand how to set that up, or there'll be complications because sometimes even when you're doing testing with Burp, the application doesn't respond to being proxied very well and it's complicated. Yeah. It's annoying, Swift. I'm not trying to blame anything. Like, the problem is we just don't have the data, and that's a big reason why pen testers can't scope properly. Is we don't have the data that we ideally want. If I knew going into a scope how many actual HTTP requests and specifically how many parameters were being sent, that would give me so much more information than I currently get.
It's a bit like using the car in the garage analogy again. It's a bit like taking your car down there. You go, it's broken, fix. And they diagnose the problem. And they come back to you, and they'll call you a bit later in the day with a number of a problem. So you go, the radiator needs replacing. Okay, how much is that going to cost me? So it costs you this plus labour, done. And that makes sense as a workflow because you've got something in front of you. You've analysed the problem, you know the scale of the job, and then you quote the job accurately. Whereas if I turn up at a garage and I say, radiator's buggered, that's what you need to fix. And then they realise it's actually nothing to do with the radiator at all. They've just taken my word for it. That's a bad situation because then they've got to come back and re-quote for more work and it's going to spiral out of control. So I'm not saying we can do that entirely. With our industry isn't exactly like a car garage. So it's not an awful lot of crossover there for remedies, but that is the problem we face is we don't know what is underneath that tip of that iceberg. And I think that goes back to that earlier comment you made about having the devs on the line as well. Those guys can help fill in some of those little gaps we have and at least talk to you about what is below the surface. Because we had this, for example, with a development company recently, and they have it's like an insurance app where their app goes around and it queries like 100 other different APIs in the background to go and get like prices and quotes and things like that for people. And it's like, but the client only sees, the user only sees the bit of the front. They don't see all of that stuff underneath, all the things you're interfacing with, all the clever stuff you're doing in the back end to get these quotes through. We don't see any of that. We have no idea. So unless the developer is sat on the call with you and can walk you through the size of those individual APIs, what they do, all their different functionality, where they're hosted, who's hosting them, what are they third party, are they internal, yada, yada, yada. It just becomes a bit of a guesswork, doesn't it? And that's part of the awkward thing, I think. So, I think it goes back to those devs. I think you need to have devs on the call. I think it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day. And infrastructure is a little bit different, yet the same. There's another t-shirt. Yeah. Infrastructure is very different, yet the same. I like it. But I think it's about understanding and it's about complexity. But there's the added adage that there's so much is changing in the infrastructure world at the moment. And a lot of pen testers have grown up with like your traditional external, internal infrastructure tests, standard build reviews and things like that. Unless they've kept up to date with what they're doing, there are some out there that are just not too comfortable with doing cloud-based things, for example. Doing the same tests but in cloud-based infrastructure, or know the extent of cloud-based applications and all that it has to offer. That's another huge area. It's just stuff like that. Not just infrastructure, not just like virtual machines hosted in the cloud, but the platforms actually host your entire application as well for you. Like they have so many interesting attack vectors associated with them. But that's another sort of specialist area. And if you haven't dug into that, I find there's a big gap in pen testers being able to scope things when they do get to that sort of stage of complexity. So it needs to be the right pen testers in the right scope with the right experience in it. And I think that answers another part of that question, why can't pen testers scope? And I think it's getting the right people in front of the right scopes. It is also part of the thing that we need to manage as managers on the other side of it. Otherwise, again, you're going to end up with mistakes and people missing complexity of various applications and such. So, there is that.
It's also asking the right questions.
Well, and if you're not 100% familiar with the technology underpinning it, you're not going to be able to ask the right questions. So, you need to have sort of set questions you go to based on experience. Yeah.
Even beyond that, like there are still companies out there, I'm sure, who are asking customers, like, how many pages does your application have?
Yeah.
That question hasn't been relevant since, I want to say, before I even entered the industry. It's that bad. When did single page applications come onto the scene? It was a long time ago now. The pages question is it's not how modern web applications work.
No.
And a better question, like that's the thing. There are so many better questions, but even those have like their caveats. Like how many routes does your application have? Might be a more modern question these days, but even that's a bit complicated. And how many pieces of functionality I tend to go with more. The problem is data. The more data you have, the better your scope is going to be, ultimately.
Yeah.
I would love, and I've talked about this at work, I would love to ask customers how many parameters total does your application use? Like, take all of your GET requests, take all of your POST requests, your puts, your deletes. How many parameters, total number of parameters across all of those unique requests? How many? I would love that, because that would be a perfect question. You'd be able to at least calculate, oh, okay, well, this application had this many, this. So the problem with that is that's a really difficult question to answer.
Well, it is, and
it would be such a useful amount of data to have, but it's just such a bad question. Like, you get a customer like doing a pen test, and they're like, oh yeah, they've asked how many parameters we use, and the devs are like, oh my god, what?
Yeah,
like,
yeah, you're right.
But ironically, I can tell you, I could go back to a customer after I've pen tested your application and tell you exactly how many parameters your application has.
From the flip side of that, we would love all that data. Would the clients love to give it is another matter. So if you're getting pen test quotes from like 3 different companies, this goes back to the speed thing we spoke about ages ago. If one of those people you selected out of your 3 to get quotes from comes back and says, can you tell me all about every single request that you make, every single method you're using, every single function you might have, you're probably going to go with the easier one. Right? If a guy that just goes, yeah, it's going to be roughly 4 days. Yeah, it's going to cost you $4,000 or whatever.
Yeah.
Just path of least resistance, isn't it? I think that sometimes sort of wins over, which is annoying from our point of view, anyway. Because then what businesses don't understand is the hidden cost of having to make up for that gap as well. Like, maybe we have to spend extra time compensating for the incorrect quote, or, you know, how do we, because at the end of the day, they've got to sell the thing to please the client from a quote point of view, and we've got to do the work and please the client from a quality work point of view. And if the two don't match up, there's a huge problem there, because we've either got to make up for quality, or the other option is just to deliver what has been sold, and that's it, in which case you knowingly give them a bad pen test result, which is not an option. So what do? Panic. Run for the hills.
But yeah, I mean, like it comes back to what I said near the beginning. Like, scoping is an impossible task. It really is. Like, it's not even an art form. Like, that's the thing. Because even if you're an experienced artist, you're going to create great stuff all the time. There's no such thing, I feel like, as an experienced pen test scoper. That's just a term I've made up. Who creates an accurate scope every time. It just doesn't happen. Like, there's some skill involved, but there's a massive drop off. Like,
oh yeah.
There's like, you hit the ceiling quite early.
Yeah.
When it comes to scoping, and then it's just luck. You're just riding like a luck wave throughout the entire time. Yeah. And so there really is no solution. All my suggestion is, if you are a customer who cares about getting an accurate scope, I would try and have as many details as you can about the application itself, about the infrastructure that's behind it. I'm talking about apps again. Sorry, Andy will tell you about networks, but like, about the infrastructure, about, you know, knowing how many roles, how many pieces of functionality. If you do have data on the number of requests that the application sends, like unique requests, that's useful. If you have data on the number of parameters it potentially sends, that's really useful. You can, even if you can honestly like install some kind of silly little HTTP proxy that just records the traffic while you're giving a demo and send that to the tester, like, or send it to the pen test company after the call, that would be really good.
Yeah, just from the infrastructure side, it's very similar detail as everything, especially when instead of like requests, we have lots of other difficulties to overcome, like VLAN structure and like network segments and things like that. And it's very easy for a client to just go around and tell you, yeah, we've got 100 IPs to test. And that's similar to like your comment about pages in the web app stuff. It's like, yeah, 100 IPs, but how are they configured? Where are they configured? How are we going to access them? Just there's so many questions that follow on from that initial question that affect the scoping and the length of the time period you need to test it properly. So yeah, there is that. Like we've had situations before where the client's gone, yeah, we've got like 50 IPs over on like 4 different VLANs or something. So yeah, you just need to test those. It's like, okay, that's fine, 50 IPs, yeah. And then they've got no actual access method for going and connecting to them all at the same time. So you have to connect to individual VLANs and stuff like that. And by the way, this VLAN is only accessible via this switch in this data center, which is a different location. So there's all kinds of complexities that can come into that. So it's worth having those sort of technical conversations. And yeah, I don't know if this is I don't know what the resolution to all of this is. I think it's just as many things. It's just
there isn't one.
There isn't one, is it? There's a number of things that need to happen, and I think there's a number of bits of advice to give out at the end of it if you haven't taken them already. And it's, if you are the client and you are coming to get quotes, maybe don't just trust the one that is turned around in the quickest possible time without even seeing or asking detail about your application, because that's probably based on guesswork. And I think be forthcoming and prepare ahead of time. If you know you're getting a pen test done, prepare your information, prepare your detail, because that's the thing that's going to cause delays as well. It's not necessarily the tester going, can you give me some more detail about this or this infrastructure or this application and how it works under the hood? It's more a case of them spending the time and having to go through to get you that information. So you know you got a pen test coming up. Prepare all that information. The testers are going to want to see stuff like Swagger files. They're going to want to see stuff like network diagrams. Make sure they're in place. Make sure you've got the right people sat there on the calls. Don't just leave it to like a non-technical person to relay the information, because it's not going to help out the quality of the test one way or another. Then I think from the pen test point of view, complacency, I think, is the biggest point we've made in here. Is I've seen that before. I know what that does. I know what that infrastructure looks like. Therefore, don't need to have the chat sort of thing. And that can really have an impact on like your timescales and your schedule. And the thing that really I find in this industry that beats people up a lot is when you have projects running into one another, or if you're having to stay late and work on like reporting or something or catching up, that burns people out no end. So yeah, try and avoid that. Make sure you get the technical detail you need.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think the only thing I would add would be if the customers obviously understand that scoping is hard, understand that you're probably not going to get a full comprehensive pen test, especially the first time. What would be useful from a customer perspective to help would be asking at the end of a pen test, hey, I understand that chances of this being full coverage is pretty slim, but did you feel like you got enough of the app covered, or do you feel like more days would be necessary? Like, because I would hope that most pen testers would answer honestly, like, oh no, I think we got everything. Or actually, this could have probably done with a couple more days. And then that for next time. If you're a serious customer and you're serious about security, you're going to get your application tested every year anyway. You might get it tested multiple times a year.
Yeah.
So it's good to know that, company A did a 4-day pen test, but they told me afterwards a 6-day would probably be better. Okay, next year I'll get a 6-day pen test. And maybe then next year, the company's like, actually 5 days would have probably covered it. Okay, so then you can adjust things. That's the thing.
Yeah.
So I think customers understand scoping is an art form, and none of us are very good artists. It's a lot of guesswork. Nobody's perfect. Probably almost no pen testers scope properly. And adjust. The nice thing about, at least I guess, the good thing about having a pen test is once you've had the pen test,
Yeah.
So you can always, scoping an application is always easier once the pen test was finished. It's just going to be frustrating that first time.
I'm going to use my garage analogy again because I'm on one with that today. But I think that's probably the optimal way for us to work. I mean, what you're saying there is you get to the end of the application once you have a good understanding of it, and then you know exactly what's going to happen next time and what you need next time. And that's kind of exactly in line with what we're saying with the garage analogy. Like you take it there, you analyze the problem, and then you quote for the fix of it. But the trouble is, in speed of turnover, that doesn't necessarily work in our world, but so well anyway. But I think you've got to be mindful of that on the client side, because just going out to market and just going, I need pen test of X application now, and not giving enough information, it's never going to result in the best sort of experience for you, one way or another. It's kind of like tying the pen tester's hands behind their back, backing them into a situation before you've even got the report delivered, which is no help to anyone. But yes, I feel like we've righted pen testing scoping.
We haven't.
And
we've just complained about it for almost an hour.
Yeah, maybe some client will pick up on it one day. And maybe one day we will do another podcast that says, a client bought us for perfect pen test scope.
Maybe.
Probably not going to be any time
Maybe
soon.
you'll be that customer.
Yeah, maybe you could be that customer. Maybe it'll be a long time before we do that podcast, but we will do it.
Oh, God.
Excellent.
Thank you for listening. I've been Tiberius. He's been Andy Swift. This has been Across the Pondcast. You can find all of our social media links in the episode description or on acrossthepondcast.net, and we will see you next time.
Tatty bye, chums.